recording right now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Diana. And just for everybody, I'm going to walk through a presentation, but please feel free to jump in, ask questions, give insights, especially when you see what the topic is. We definitely want to hear from you as well. And I tried to pick, jumping ahead a little bit, but I tried to pick some examples as we walk through the presentation, knowing that we're eventually going to have a talk about internships, summer associateships, jobs, really what we know you're all here for, which is to get a law degree, to practice law. And some of the things that you might run into and experience in those jobs, and just try to empower you as much as possible. On the last call, let's see if I can go ahead and share my screen. Please let me know if everyone can see this full screen. Good to go? Okay, awesome. So when we had our last, it was the AMA, there was something that came up quite a bit. It came up with the question, some follow-up questions, and it came up with the chat, which was this idea of imposter syndrome and how to get over imposter syndrome, how to deal with it, what are some coping mechanisms and coping tools. And it came up quite a bit. The board, we sort of joked around saying like, well, you never really get over it. It never really goes away. No matter where you are professionally, there's always somebody who came before you that did it a certain way that you might look up to, or somebody who's above you as a boss. But I think, we talked on the board about a potential presentation about looking at this as, imposter syndrome is not always necessarily going to be a weakness. And we really wanted to reframe this. It is a perspective, and it's a feeling you're going to have, and it's going to be your viewpoint, but that can be used as a strength. And it's not having that can be a really big problem. And that's where I think privilege comes in. We'll talk in a few minutes about this idea of practicing law, and it's a right to practice law once you get your license, but there's also quite a bit of responsibilities that come along with it. And this idea of imposter syndrome, in a certain way, it can empower you, because no one wants to have a thing taken away from them, especially if it's a thing that part of you thinks, oh, do I deserve to be here? And that was the other thing that I think one of my takeaways from the last meeting was imposter syndrome. It's crazy. We've got a group of fellows who a board of legal practitioners collectively decided that you have inspiring backgrounds, fascinating perspectives, and you're going to bring to the practice of law what it desperately needs, which is diversity and different viewpoints and just different ways of seeing things, different perspectives. So privilege in law can be really, really bad. More so, not to say that more so than other fields, but because there's this idea of duty that comes along with practicing law. And I think, again, I'm not unaware of the irony of a white dude giving a presentation on this idea of privilege. And I think for a lot of people, it can be tough to identify privilege because they get defensive about it as if it's a tangible thing they have. Like it's like this a white privilege credit card you can have. And if someone identifies privilege, it's like, well, you get defensive. It's like, oh, well, that's saying I, didn't work hard to get where I am. It's like, well, no one's really saying that, right? There's an NBA, a former NBA player, and he's a psychologist out of the UK. His name is John Amici. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of him. He had a really great way of characterizing privilege that I just really stuck with me, is privilege is not a tangible thing. It's a lack of impediment. And it's just a different way to look at that. When you are surrounded by a community of lawyers your entire life, and statistically we'll get into who that historically has been, impediments, or the perceived impediments, they're not there as much, and that in and of itself can be the privilege. It doesn't have to be a tangible thing. And when you ignore the privilege and you practice law as if you don't have it, you can make some really, really bad decisions. But we We want you to be excited about this. We're all excited that you're going to be lawyers. It's a lot of fun being a lawyer. It's kind of great. You might not fully see that until you get licensed and you're done. When you get the letter that says you passed the bar, it is like such a wash of stress that sort of comes over you at first, but it doesn't really hit for a while after when you're like, oh, I probably don't ever have to do this again unless I want to practice in a different state. So just a couple of things, just the rights and benefits of practicing law, the fun stuff. It is a professional and intellectual empowerment, and not just for practicing itself, but dealing with everyday life. You're going to get a mortgage on a house, you're going to sign a lease, you're dealing anything that has terms and conditions. You are just going to be empowered as a lawyer more so than other people. You're going to understand and appreciate the news a lot better. Things are going to make way more sense from a constitutional law perspective, from a crim law perspective. It's watching the news is going to be different, and that even filters to movies and TV. They become sort of annoying, and there's a potential that you will also become annoying to your friends when you watch a movie or TV. A lot of times you'll see the best example I can have is anytime someone mentions, and this is always the case, it's when there's a courtroom say, they'll talk about hearsay. You'll be like, objection, Your Honor, hearsay, and the judge will say, oh, you're sustained. And you're like, what? No. Oh my God, that's not, well, technically it's hearsay, but it's one of the exceptions because the declarant's unavailable. You'll know all this. I'm like, that's just lazy TV writing. It's just a more interesting way to see the world. Ability to help friends and family in the sense of professional community. You're going to talk to other lawyers who are going to know what you're going through, and you're going to know what they're going through. So the capacity for professional empathy is so much greater. And it really is fantastic. But as much as it is a right, there are duties and responsibilities. And we'll talk, this will be through study sessions and when you study for the bar. It's a duty as much as it is a right. And it's a really strange thing to get used to, this idea of putting your client first and having to make decisions where sometimes they're going to need to hear bad news, even when you don't want to give them bad news. They need to hear it. They need to be able to make informed decisions. And we'll go in a little bit to talk about even when you practice law as a sole practitioner, or if you're in a small partnership, how to handle money, how to handle funds. Some of these decisions points come up and they just seem like everyday decisions. We're like, okay, well, I can just do it this way. And realize that the potential impact of this, you just always got to maintain this idea of, if you're acting in the capacity of a lawyer, you're not acting for yourself. And that's where that privilege thing can really trip people up. And at the end of the day, that sense of professional community, that's what this gets to look like, right? Everyone's, it becomes the SpiderMan meme of we're all lawyers, we're all in this together. And that's great in theory, right? This idea that we're all in this together, we are all on the equal footing, we can all progress the same way as lawyers, and we all have equal opportunities. It's not always the case, and I'm sure coming from a background of being a person of color, being a woman, being non-binary, there's all of these areas where it's not going to feel like this right away, right? Demographic practice of law, it's a really, really small percentage. The numbers are a bit off here because, the total population in the US, that includes babies, and babies can't practice law. Still, it's when you go through, I think I got this from the 0.5% from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's a really, really small community, and it's a fun community, but the SpiderMan meme starts to look a little bit different when you look at some of the demographics, where 81% of lawyers that are practicing are white, and that's down. It's down. It's still a lot. It's down. Even a couple of years ago, that was 89%, which is a crazy number. Even as a white dude, if I am in a room and there's 100 people and 89 of them are white, I'm probably not in the right room. It's something. It's going to be a weird event. Whatever it is, my first question should be, wait, why are there so many white people here? This is a little strange. 62% of practitioners are men. And then you get into this notion of what percentage are in leadership positions, equity partners. There's, non-equity partners, slightly lower, but I think it's like around 70 to 80% of non-equity partners are white. Like there's progress, and there's not, it's not happening as fast as I think everyone would like. And I can even say as a white guy, when I'm putting forth a proposal or I'm dealing with clients, and if the team is entirely white, it's super uncomfortable to be on that side of things. Diversity is so incredibly important. And from a substantive practice of law perspective, understanding where people come from, it's real tough when that happens, because this starts to look like this, right? This is the SpiderMan meme, sort of doesn't really have the same effect anymore when you see how it can happen in practice. And these are all the Supreme Court, this different, you can go right to the Supreme Court website. The photos are wild. Everyone's facial hair back in the 1800s, it's like bonkers. But I mean, this is not what the SpiderMan meme in the practice of law should be. This is better, right? This is much more reflective from an overall population perspective, ignoring what some of the judicial philosophies of some of these Supreme Court justices are that I, maybe don't necessarily agree with at all. It's better, right? It's a lot better. So one of the things I wanted to do is we're going to go through a list. I wanted to have a top 10, but some of these just got so egregious. I was like, we can't go through 10. I wanted to pick out some examples of when there's a clear lack of imposter syndrome, where it really would have been a whole lot better if some of these attorneys had imposter syndrome a little bit, or maybe questioned or constantly checked in with themselves. Like, okay, like, am I a part of this community? Am I representing myself as a lawyer like I should be? And we'll go through a couple fun examples of when that goes incredibly, incredibly poorly. But I want to give a brief anecdote of how this impacted me when I was at the Securities and Exchange Commission. And Diana and some other board members, please feel free to jump in with your own personal stories that you feel comfortable telling. At the SEC, if you're a public company or a broker dealer, it feels like law enforcement, right? The SEC comes in, you watch TV and you watch movies, they've got the jackets that say SEC, and they go and they open the door and it sounds very official. They're not law enforcement, they're regulators. They have somewhat of a quasi law enforcement authority, but it's not law enforcement. And you definitely shouldn't treat it as such. And when you get your job at the SEC, they give you credentials. Looks like an FBI badge. It's got the bifold thing. When you flip it up, it's got the seal of the government. It's got your name. And it looks very much, if you do what this guy did that I'm about to tell you, it can look very official, and it can get you in a lot of trouble. I worked in the Los Angeles regional office of the SEC. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Comic-Con down in San Diego. Massive comic festival. It's so large and there's so many people that it's turned into its own societal infrastructure. You have to have certain things on hand. You have to have medical resources on hand. You have to have law enforcement resources on hand, and they even have a Comic-Con jail. It's like if you go to an NFL stadium, if you're one of those people who runs out into the field, you get put in the Philadelphia Eagles have their own little cell and you go right in there. There is Comic-Con jail. And a couple of attorneys were down in San Diego and they really wanted to go to Comic-Con, didn't have tickets. And one of the lawyers thought it would be a great idea to use his SEC credentials to try to get into Comic-Con for free through the law enforcement door. So he went up, and I hope I'm not going to say his name. It might slip out because I told the story so many times to other government people. So Dana, we might have to bleep that out of the recording if I do. This individual showed his credentials to law enforcement, said, I'm law enforcement, there's an investigation, I need to get inside a Comic-Con. I was like, yeah, I don't think so. This looks like it says SEC. You pretty much knew that this was not a law enforcement official. That's the opportunity to back away. That's the opportunity to know when you might be caught, and doubling down because you act like you deserve there to be there is probably a really, really bad idea. And this guy doubled down and said, no, 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 no. I'm federal law enforcement. I have to be inside a Comic-Con. They did put him in Comic-Con. They put him in Comic-Con jail, and they put him in jail, and the bosses had to go down to San Diego and get him out of Comic-Con jail. It was a debacle, and it got anyone in the securities community in the West Coast found out about this, because it was just unimaginably embarrassing, not just for him, but for everybody else. And that's another reason why I wanted to go through some of these examples of when attorneys don't recognize privilege and they see the right to practice as being a greater pull than the duty they have when they do practice, is because you're going to be around a lot of attorneys, and 99.9% of them are great. They're there for the right reasons. They get it, but just want you to be a little bit aware the fact that sometimes there's some folks who don't approach this the right way. Diane, I can see you nodding. Some folks are like this person who I will not name in Comic-Con jail.
Yeah, I don't have any as extreme stories, but you definitely see it, just commonplace in meetings and things like that. People getting way ahead of themselves, and that sort of ego, I guess, getting to their heads, and sometimes we do have to check ourselves.
And I think a lot of those people, it ends up backfiring. But the people who act like they deserve to be there and act like they have all the right answers. I was talking to a couple of the fellows, and they talked about gunners in school. Like gunners, like that's fine. Like it's great if you're going for it, but if it's too much, whatever the thing you're doing, if it's too much, and like you as law students, you notice, or as summer associates or associates or law clerks, if you're like, this doesn't really look good, other people notice too. Like you're not crazy. Other people notice. You don't have to worry about the partners not noticing that this person's not here for the right reason, or interjecting themselves in meetings as if they're the partner. Like other people will notice. So if you worry that you're not doing enough, like make sure you find your voice. But if you feel like some people that are really exuding that privilege, like it's not going to go unnoticed. Maybe not everyone will notice it, but people who are the right decision makers and the cool people that you'll be working for, it's going to be pretty obvious to them too. All right. Who's up first? All right, Thomas Kraft Jr. This guy hates me. Mr. Kraft, I actually have a personal, not relationship with this guy. I think everybody, especially when you're new lawyers, you want to prove yourself. And to a certain extent, we all do this. Like we all want people to like us, right? It's a reflection of everybody likes you. It's like, well, I'm kind of a nice person then. Maybe doing something right. This guy hates me. And it is one of my just points of personal and professional pride is that this guy does not like me. One of the reasons why I wanted to bring him up is this is a good example of something. It's an assignment that you might get as a summer associate, and as an associate, if you're at a law firm. The type of work that got this guy in trouble is the type of thing that somebody might ask you to do. This guy is a security law attorney. He's been around forever. He's the type of person that if you are a public company that is, well, I should back up. In the US, all public companies, if you're going to sell securities, if you are going to sell an interest in your company, whether it's Netflix or Apple, Twitter, whatever it is, all of those securities, that interest in your company has to be registered with the SEC. The SEC demands that there's registration. They need to have oversight. If you're going to sell registered securities, there are certain like accounting standards that have to go into it. you are impacting large scale the US markets, and the SEC demands to have some sort of oversight on you. It just increases transparency across the board, and attorneys are a massive component of this. There are some companies who are too small or for various reasons do not have to have their securities registered. There's not a presumption of that. If you pass the Howey test and you're trying to sell a security in a company, the default approach is it should be registered unless there's exemptions. And one of the main things that you need if you're going for an exemption to say that the security does not need to be registered is an attorney letter. An attorney has to go in, do an investigation, conduct due diligence. It's a giant process. It can be expensive. And there's certain attorneys who are known for doing that and doing it well. Thomas Kraft did it for everyone, and he did not care who that was. These unregistered securities, these companies, this is at worst, right? At best, it can be an exemption to the securities regs, but at worst, this is Jordan Belfort, pump and dump. You agree. I mean, this is the stuff where it's, pump and dump securities fraud, they call it micro cap. It's garbage companies that you shouldn't be selling securities in these companies if they can't afford to stay afloat on their own. And it becomes a huge issue. And these attorneys' letters, if you ignore red flags, your job, if there are red flags present and you do your due diligence as an attorney, you can't sign the letter. You might want to get the money for signing the letter, and that's great. But if stuff's there and there are red flags, you shouldn't sign the letter. You definitely shouldn't sign the letter when every single company, like Mr. Kraft dealt with, was a massive problem. There was fraud everywhere. And he had another attorney who was disbarred for similar activity, conducting all of the research and wrote all the due diligence letters. And then he would just sign them and just send them off. Great, good to go. So in addition to the fact that he was, kind of a jerk, and I was not a huge fan of his, and vice versa. So he got to lose his law license for 5 years. I thought he should have been disbarred forever, but in Florida, they do Florida stuff. No offense to Florida, but they thought, okay, we'll do 5 years, and then he can reapply in 5 years, and then we'll see. But he pleaded guilty to federal crimes. I doubt he'll ever get his law license again. And I thought this was an interesting example because you might be asked to do something like this. I know a lot of the fellows want to get into M&A work, want to get into securities and markets, and you might get asked, hey, do research on this. Here are 10 factual points. Here's 10 legal points. Where are we on this? And if you are asked to write a bunch of these letters and some of these companies start looking familiar, it's like, well, how are there so many securities in this company that no one's heard of? We just don't want you to be put into a position to where you're doing something on behalf of a lawyer where it's like, this is maybe not a good thing. So in all of these examples, we're going through, I mean, all these dudes are idiots, but to the extent that you have questions about, is this a right thing to do? We're here as resources. Ask us. We might have encountered this before. So, well, the partner, yeah, it's the right thing to do. The partner's doing it this way because of this. And if you don't feel comfortable asking the partner why this way, we're always here as a resource. But like I said, 99.9% of attorneys are going to be going about things the right way. Thomas did not. Okay, Larry. Larry's biggest crime is that he doesn't understand irony. So Larry Clayman is a famous attorney. You might have seen him on the news a lot. He's a former prosecutor. He's a big attorney, big political guy. He's the founder of Judicial Watch, which I have my own thoughts on that organization, but let's just talk about the stated goal of Judicial Watch, which is to maintain transparency in the practice of law in fields where lawyers tend to go into, like politics. That's Judicial Watch. Any of the three branches, Judicial Watch is supposed to look over there and point out when things are not going correctly. So Larry was a practicing attorney. and he filed a lawsuit on behalf of his client. His client was suing her employer for claims of sexual harassment and retaliation. This was, I think, back in 2010. So they were going through the suit. It's normal litigation process, attorney putting out discovery, putting out doc requests, taking depositions. Larry thought at one point in the case it was the right time to tell his client that he had romantic feelings towards her. It's like, this is the time. I'm going to do it. I'm going to shoot my shot. And he let his client know that he had feelings for her. And that's as far as it went. There was no, and you're going to see a lot of this in professional responsibility, this idea of, sexual relationships with a client, where, a lot of states, I think almost all states now have rules and requirements here where it's like, well, if it was pre-existing, then it might be fine. But if it happens after, you can't do it. This was not a sexual relationship. His idiotic statement and him shooting his shot was enough to create a conflict of interest to where he could no longer represent this woman in an unbiased way. You lose objectivity, and your job is not to get into your feelings. Your job is to represent your client. And he continued to represent her even after she fired him. So that was probably not a good idea either. But Larry made quite a few mistakes. And look, this can happen to anybody. From a privilege perspective, this statistically, and there's a bunch of articles about this, because it comes up a lot with lawyers, but it also comes up with psychologists and psychiatrists in their relationship with their patients. So there's a bunch of studies out there on this and when it goes wrong. And look, it happens to be guys a lot. It happens to be men who do this in positions of professional power with clients who are women. And there's just an inherent conflict of interest there. And statistically, I think that's a glaring example of privilege and just thinking you can get away with something without paying attention to the fact that there's a massive power dynamic. And I think the reason that I wanted to bring this up is, again, no doubt, like I said, very, very small percentage of attorneys do this. So this is more of an issue of, I don't actually think any of you are going to put yourselves in this position, but it's more to just be aware when you're out on your summer associateship, there's going to be dinners, there's going to be outings, there's going to be a bunch of alcohol. When you're a lawyer, you're going to be taking clients out to dinner with other attorneys. Even if you are not the person to be involved in something, again, you are the company you keep. If you see something happening and it's like not the best, you like see another attorney, a partner, or hear of this happening with someone you work with and one of the clients, it might not directly impact you from a professional setting. It's like, no, I was going to watch. It's like, that's not you who did it. It's this other person. And it's going to make your life a whole lot easier. And if the client fires the firm and that was your main source of billables, like there's so many ways where this it could just turn your life into a really difficult situation that if you can avoid it and you see something, again, let us know. You don't have to give details. You can just give a vague description of what happened, ask our opinion, how would we approach this? And definitely anywhere you work, there's going to be an HR department that you're going to have regulations and requirements for seeing this stuff happen. I believe it every time. I don't know if at your firm, I think a lot of firms have a professional responsibility group or a couple of people in like head office where if there's issues, you should go talk to this person. I've never worked at a firm, so that's.
No, that's definitely true. And, I know our firm, and I hope most other firms have components of this in their training for the summer associates and for new associates. That this is obviously zero tolerance on this kind of stuff. And, that if you do see something that makes you uncomfortable in any way, shape, or form, there are multiple resources of people that you can report to. Or if you're always unsure, mentors, anybody on P2P, things like that, you can raise it to us and we can help guide you to the right people. But, dudes like Larry should not be getting away with anything like this.
No, and I think one of the reasons I was worried about this idea of, especially this idea of feeling like you might not belong or having imposter syndrome is I can't speak to this because I'm one of the 81%, right? So I don't know what it's going to be like for you as an underrepresented person practicing law to look around and see 81% of the around you. It's like, I don't know, you might not feel empowered. You have every right to be there as anybody else. And no one should mess with your ability to practice law or impact your day in any capacity. That is such bullshit. It's very, very hard, especially when you're doing 20 hours a day sometimes, you haven't had days off in a while. It can be tough being a lawyer. It's intellectually demanding. It can be hard enough. Somebody else being a moron should not impact your life in any way. Like, you should always feel empowered to stand up. But like, no, I have every right to be here as you, and you're screwing this up for everybody. Like, people like Larry. I think we got another Larry coming up soon. Lawrence, okay, not a Larry, but Lawrence, close enough. This guy, and again, 45-year practitioner, and I don't want to say that new attorneys won't do things that are not in line with their professional responsibility and their duties as a lawyer, but you do see this a lot with people who have been in the industry for a really long time, because you've been doing something for 45 years. You tend to know what the shortcuts are. You tend to know, well, I can do this and get away with this, and it just really gets dangerous. Again, it's privilege on top of the fact that you've been doing something for 45 years. There's the privilege of being a veteran in something. It can create really, really bad habits. So again, if there's an attorney who is doing something because they've been around for a really long time, and look, there's going to be things that you're going to know right after you pass the bar that you will, in 5 years, will totally forget. I swear the best legal minds are the people who just practice the bar. I mean, from a knowledge perspective about what the subcomponents of a rule is, the exceptions, the rule, your sub rules, like how many elements are within a certain thing. No one is better than people who have just passed the bar, because after a while you tend to forget about stuff, not just the little nuances of the law itself, but you get used to doing something for so long. It's human nature is you tend to take shortcuts, you tend to take the easy way out. And it's just always being on top of that. And Lawrence is a good example of what happens, again, from a financial standpoint. Look, I mean, practicing law, there's a potential for a lot of money in it. And that's a good thing. If you are doing something well and you're great at it and you get paid for it really well, there's no, I honestly believe there's no shame in that. I know some folks want to go into M&A because they find it interesting, and there's also a ton of money in M&A. Like, absolutely, go do your thing. But there's also that responsibility of, yes, I'm doing M&A work and I'm making a ton of money, but that money becomes mine at some point. And before that happens, that money is 100% not your money, even if it's in an account that you have control over. So if you want to be a sole practitioner, or you want to be a sole practitioner in an area that doesn't conflict with your job, a lot of firms, especially smaller ones where they don't have wide practice areas, you can do your own real estate work while you practice in a purely crim law perspective. A lot of in-house counsels will allow some external, want to hang out a shingle, that's great. But then you have to deal with client money, or if you want to partner up with somebody and have a small firm with 3 to 4 attorneys, like, now you're dealing with the money too. It's not just, you're an associate and at a big law firm and money's handled over there and it's not my problem. This can come up quicker than you think, how to handle customer funds, and being able to distinguish between my money and not my money becomes difficult in any capacity, right? But it's harder when it's all in one place, because then it's sort of all of the money, and like, mine's in there somewhere, theirs is in there too, but it's like, the money for now. That puts you in a position sometimes where you have to make decisions where your duty of care and your duty of loyalty can come into play. And it's the justification tends to be, well, I got to keep the lights on. I've got to pay rent. Otherwise, I can't represent this person anyway. So I'll just go ahead and spend a little bit of money here, and I'll take money out of the IOLTA account or the client trust account, and I'll pay this bill for now, knowing that I'll repay it later. Or in Larry's case, Lawrence's case, he did that as well, but he would also just take money out of the account. He was in a negative balance on his client account for a very, very long time and didn't even attempt to keep a separation. And then when he was asked about it, there was subpoenas sent to the bank. He just lied a whole lot. And his license is suspended for 18 months, but I just kind of the background of, you can go ahead and Google Lawrence. The background of the case, I don't think he's ever going to practice again. I mean, that's the other issue is like, okay, let's say these people don't get completely disbarred. Man, like the reputational damage alone is so crazy. Like that's one thing that you, not to say that you can't get it back, but it's real difficult to get it back because, I mean, this is just a presentation we're given to poke fun at some of these idiots. And he becomes an embarrassment to the legal community. Like, how do you go back from that? Like, how do you go back from you create your reputation as a lawyer? When someone Googles your name, you don't want them to get this stuff. And I think that's the biggest, not the biggest issue with people just ignoring privilege in the practice of law, but it's like, well, how did you not think this was going to happen? Like, how could you be so blind to your own privilege that you're like, hey, I'm going to do this thing, not recognizing that the consequences are going to be just us making fun of you with your stupid picture, knowing that you just were stealing clients' money for a very long time. It's just, it's weird. It's so short-sighted. And it's so bizarre. I think that's our last Larry for this presentation. We've got one more guy to go through, and then I just wanted to open it up for any questions and just to general thoughts and just talk about this idea of imposter syndrome, which these gentlemen didn't have, and just maybe how to approach that and just some things to think about. A lot of people maybe know this guy. He's sort of famous right now. Alex Murdoch and the Murdoch family. We're going to ignore the murder that's involved because, I mean, obviously murder's not conducive to the practice of law. So just that in and of itself just disqualifies this guy. He is a complete monster. And when this first came out, this case, when I think he first got arrested for, I forgot what it was, where things started to really make national news. But one of the things that stuck with me was his family. And again, this idea of privilege and coming from a practice of law, not just your own practice of law coming from like, oh, I have my own privilege. In fact, that 81% of the people that practice law look like me, but this was generational. They called his area, the county that he represented, Murdoch country. This was a guy who's with the low country of South Carolina. South Carolina they're solicitors, but they're basically district attorneys, right? They're the people in that area who are in charge of all the law enforcement prosecutions. He was a solicitor. His family, the descendants of Murdochs, were solicitors from 1920 up until 2006, 3 in a row. They ran this, like the county area, I think it was District 16. You didn't do anything without going to pay tribute to the Murdochs. There's no prohibition on acting as a solicitor, which is a part-time job, more or less, and then being a law firm partner. So how's that going to work? Where you have a private benefit on the law firm side, but you're also acting in the public trust on this other side. It's a really difficult. I would never want to do this. I would never want to have a public job as a lawyer and also be a partner at a law firm that deals with the same people in the low country South Carolina. That's just potentially rife for conflicts of interest. And how do you not feel like you belong somewhere when, pre-World War II, your family was running the place in the same capacity you are now. And this guy just let everything go to his head. I think right now there's 73 charges against him, not including the murder stuff, where I think just stealing settlement money right from clients where they never even got it, just went right into his account, hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time. I think he's looking at around 370, I think it's 370 something years in prison just for the stuff he did as a lawyer, and just, I guess, didn't look back. I mean, obviously there's not 97,000 charges, but it feels like it, because there's multiple, even the computer crimes, there's like multiple charges of computer crime in the first degree, and then there's a second degree. And then this was the most glaring example of privilege in the practice of law, where you just can think you can get away with anything that I've seen in a very, very long time. I think this guy is a massive cautionary tale of privilege taken to the almost comic extreme, right? Like, you would never think that something like this, like, how could you abuse the practice this much? And this guy found a way. I mean, he did it, and it's just not gonna go well for him, hopefully, because it's pretty wild. And that's it. I thought if we could maybe do 10, but then as I was going through this, I was like, oh, there's no way we're going to get through 10. So this is the example of, I know it's dumb, and it seems like some of these are really, like, he's an extreme example. Lawrence is not really an extreme example. This happens all the time. I just picked one example of attorneys who just don't, they do commingle their funds with client money, and it's never a good idea. A lot of lawyers also, I think a lot of us became lawyers because we're not great at math. At least that was me. I became a lawyer because I have no math skills whatsoever. So I don't even want to put myself in the position to where I have to start making decisions or keeping track of things like that. This happens all the time. Larry, happens a lot, tends to, like I said, statistically tends to happen to one population of practitioners more than others, but it does happen. And it's just, again, it's like, I have the right to do this thing. I have the right to break this personal boundary with somebody who I'm supposed to have a professional relationship with, because I think she's really attractive and she needs to know that. She does not need to know that. Like the 100% thing she does not need to know. And now he got suspended because of that. This stuff happens. It happens a lot. So, we just want you to be prepared, just to be aware of your surroundings when you do practice, and know that if you do feel like, you have a little bit of imposter syndrome, that can be an incredibly healthy thing. And it can mean that you're going to, view the idea of practicing law as not a right that you have just because 81% of the people around me look like I do, or my family's been doing this for, since before the roaring 20s. So it's fine that I'm doing what I'm doing. It's just that's a bad way to look at things. And having a little bit of imposter syndrome, not enough to where you don't feel empowered, but it can actually be a really healthy thing, and it can be an empowering thing, because you're looking at things the right way, and you're looking out for yourself. Because at the end of the day, your reputation, your law license, like, once that's gone, it's gone. And these people are great examples of that. So that's it. I will stop sharing now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. I mean, some of those people are, I hope never to see again. But it is really important to take notice of, how we feel. And, if you are sort of an underrepresented person in a law firm or in any kind of situation, internship, that you do have that right to be there. And just because you maybe don't feel like you do deserve to be there should never stop you from, turning that around. And if you're made to feel uncomfortable, or something's going on that seems a little off, or, a partner's asking you to do something, and, you got to trust that instinct a little bit. It's a fine line. You don't want to doubt every single thing that you're doing, or, second guess everything, but we have really great intuition. And sometimes you have to listen, you know, when something seems off or doesn't seem appropriate, that's not the instance to hold back on. You know, I think we should always challenge ourselves to speak up whenever we can. But these are really important ones where certain people, you know, just have that privilege of walking through life, you know, as Michael said, with no barriers, and not thinking and not second guessing and not having that doubt and nagging voice in their head. And, you know, part of our challenge is to check them and make sure that, you know, this doesn't continue, and that, you know, the lawyers that you're all going to be, and fabulous lawyers, that this is a new generation, a new way of thinking of things. And, you know, we're always here as resources, but love to see if anybody has any thoughts or questions. We've got a few more minutes.
Just want to say, I noticed in the chat the updated photo with Justice Jackson. I totally agree. I saw that. I'm like, how do you not take the photo before? I mean, when her first day in the court, she's sworn in, the photo should already be out there. Like, it should already be ready. Is not the case. And I was like, huh, interesting.
I like that. Never heard. I feel bad for any Larrys, but I agree. Be a little suspect.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, this is Leslie.
Oh.
I just, well, you know, just to give a comment, sorry. Here, let me turn on my camera. I was like listening to this and studying for my midterm in the background. But I guess you know, I appreciate the, like, calling out these, they sound like caricatures to me, but it's good to know that these are real lawyers that are out there practicing, and it just like reminds me that I am totally worthy of being in this position, and that, you know, I am smarter than these guys, and I would never try and get away with anything like this. So I just think it's a good reminder, and, you know, appreciate you hosting this today.
Thank you so much, and good luck on your midterms. I see some other people look like they're in the library too. But yeah, it's an important, Sean, it's an important reminder, you know, and it's something that, you know, we all have our mantras and things that we, you know, do as sort of our self-empowerment and maintenance. But one of those things is, you know, we deserve to be here. We, you know, we question this behavior. Just because you're in a position of power and you're a white male, and, you know, unfortunately, you know, most lawyers still look like that, does not mean that you get to, you know, use that privilege and walk away from situations that you need to be held accountable for. So I'm glad that that helped, and wish everybody good luck on midterms. And like I said, another throw out a pitch for October 22nd. I cannot reiterate, if anybody has done it before, you know, that's this program with Dawn, and you can jump in. I know it's a Saturday morning, but you can jump in at any time if you can't start it at 10. But especially for folks that have had midterms, you know, I went to a law school where we just had one exam, but if you do have any kind of prelim or midterm, it's great to kind of come with things that you were unsure about, or you didn't feel like you nailed, or you were kind of trying to still work on your studying skills or whatever. You know, come armed with those questions, and it will really be a great benefit. Yes, agree, Star. I don't know if you saw that, Michael, but yes, a healthy dose. We all need a little bit of that skepticism.
But I mean, like, I see, like you mentioned, like not so much that you don't check in with yourself and realize that, like, no, I have every right to be here just as much as they do. And there's really no, the SpiderMan meme should be from a professional setting. You should feel equal to everyone else that you're practicing with.
Great. All right.
All right, well, good
thanks,
luck with
everybody.
studying.
And thank you so much, Michael, for the PowerPoint. It was wonderful, and hosting this webinar. And we'll see everybody soon.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.